Before we bring up our next speaker, I have a couple of questions for you all. Can I get a show of hands here? Who here is familiar with the situation at Founders Brewing Company? That's pretty much all of the room. For those who don't know, a former Founders employee named Tracy Evans filed a racial discrimination lawsuit against the Michigan craft brewery. He claimed that multiple employees used a racial slur in his presence. The lawsuit received some initial press, but became a full-blown PR disaster after a deposition in the case leaked. In that document, the GM of Founders Detroit Brew Pub refused to acknowledge whether Tracy Evans is black. He is. That led to protests and consumer and retailer boycotts. All right, I need another show of hands here. How many of you want a more diverse industry? I think I know the answer, but that's everyone in the room. That attitude is why we brought Graci Harkema to Brewbound Live. She is the former Diversity and Inclusion Director at Founders. She was hired in January in the midst of that extremely raw situation. She was among the very first diversity and inclusion directors in the craft brewing industry. Graci tried to fix some of the issues at Founders, but she found major issues of will within the organization to do so. 10 months later, she resigned. She is here. She has started her own consulting firm, Graci LLC, and she's going to tell you about her experience. So please welcome Graci down to the stage. I got you a water.
Thank you.
I think I need one after that.
You did great. Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Justin.
So you jumped into a really, really raw situation. Why did you want to take on that challenge?
Great question. I get that question a lot, especially after I resigned. People said, why did you take that role? So I took the position because knowing, I'm sure like a consumer and being aware of the industry like many of us in the room and seeing the headlines about a year ago, I saw it as an opportunity to make a difference. I either thought I can be upset about this situation and I can add fuel to the fire, or I can jump into it and do everything that I can to enhance the culture and make a difference so that there weren't more Tracy Evans types of lawsuits.
Were you a fan of the brewery before? Were you a craft fan before?
I was, yeah. So I actually live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, right downtown next to the brewery. So I had been going to the brewery soon after it opened. I worked at a law firm at the time of it opening, and my coworkers at the time, I was 18 years old. After work for happy hour, they would go to the brewery. So I, being young in my career and wanting to impress my coworkers who were 20 years older, I went to the brewery. So I had been going there for quite a long time as a fan and as a consumer, and understood from the outside perspective what the culture would be like. But I also knew in order to make a difference, in order to implement change, you have to be in it.
So when they bring you in and you start talking about this job, this potential job, what are they telling you it's going to be like, and then what was it actually like?
Yeah, so what they had told me, so I'd been working in diversity and inclusion for the previous 6 years in the technology industry, and so I wasn't looking to leave. I was supporting Fortune 100s in the industry, and Founders leadership team reached out to me and said, hey, I had done some work with Google, and they said, we were impressed with your work. We would like to have you on. What they had communicated to me was that they wanted to enhance the culture, and they didn't want any employee to feel that they were uncomfortable or feeling like they were discriminated in their role.
Did you get the impression at that time that they were willing to make the needed changes?
I did. I 100% did. It was very convincing. I had thought from everything that they had described to me about what they needed and why they wanted the position, I felt like their hearts were definitely in it, and it was a top priority to them.
So you end up taking the job. What's the reaction that you're hearing from people when you take
Oh
on
man!
that challenge?
So when I took the position, I received a lot of backlash, a lot of negativity, a lot of social media bullying.
Really?
Yes. So I'm heavily involved in the LGBTQ community on a local level and on a national level, and I'm also involved with various people of color communities, and so I received backlash from both communities. I had community partnerships that I had worked on in my previous career, many of which I had been partnering with them for 5 to 10 years. They no longer wanted to partner with me. I had had several friends, including friends since elementary school, that no longer wanted to be associated with me.
That's cold.
So yeah, it was hard. It was really hard, but also I believed in making a difference. So even though that experience was really difficult and very challenging, I still thought at that time, hey, if we can make a difference and if this is going to be better, it's going to be worth it.
So when you assessed the situation, what did you see? Did you think that this was maybe a singular issue? Did you think it was a brewery issue? Was it an industry issue? Was it a leadership issue? Like, what when you're taking that job and you see it, how did you view that?
So I'll start by sharing what I thought it was going to be. Leading up to when I started, I initially thought it was a staff issue, and I thought it was a systemic issue across the entire organization. When I started, I had focus groups of previous and current employees that were identifying in an underrepresented group. And I met with them on an individual basis and in small groups to learn about what their experiences were. So what I realized overall is that overall the staff is inclusive, and overall the staff wants the environment to be more inclusive. But what I realized then was a disconnect between the leadership and their lack of awareness into the journey of underrepresented groups.
So how do you tackle that? How do you sort of try and, change the minds or win the hearts of the leadership?
Yeah, so good question. I spoke with them on several conversations and several meetings, trying to have them understand what somebody else's journey was, or have them understand why, especially when the leaked deposition happened, why that was so offensive, and why the concept of colorblindness and not seeing someone for their identity and not seeing somebody as their whole selves, why that not is just offensive, but is also subtle racism as well.
At what point did you sort of figure out that you weren't gonna be able to do the things that needed to be done to make the change that needed to be made?
So it was the week that I resigned. So the leaked deposition occurred on a Monday, and we had several meetings that week, almost every hour, about how we were going to respond to the public, about the importance of addressing the issue, not just of the leaked deposition, but addressing the overall systemic racial issues and racial discrimination that we're seeing in society, but also trying to have the team understand the importance of taking responsibility, apologizing to the community, apologizing to the staff as well, and also losing sight of what was important. That's the core of the people. Mm-hmm. So it was over that course of that week, and then I resigned on that Friday of that week.
Yeah, I know you can't go into too many specifics of the lawsuit, but in your resignation letter, you mentioned that had Founders leadership listened to your advice, then the headlines would have read differently, and Founders had the opportunity to be a hero in the way that they handled that situation. So what specifically did you advise them to do that they didn't end up doing?
So my suggestion so the leaked deposition was on a Monday. By Tuesday, there were boycotts that were occurring starting in Michigan, expanding from Detroit to Grand Rapids to the Midwest area. By Wednesday, it hit Washington Post, Newsweek, and NBC, and the boycotts were across the country. And my suggestion was, hey, we need to own this. We need to take responsibility. We need to say, we messed up. And not only that we messed up, but we recognize the systemic racial issues and discrimination that we're seeing on a societal level, but also that we recognize that it was taking place within the brewery as well. And because we had messed up, we're acknowledging it, we apologize, we're taking action, we're taking responsibility, and then to roll out our diversity and inclusion plan of what we've been doing from an internal structure and also what we've been doing externally.
Taking ownership seems to be something that could have been a game changer in that situation.
100%. 100%, yes.
And why do you think that there was just a lack of will to do so?
I can't speak for them. It just wasn't something that they were comfortable doing. I think oftentimes as humans, I think when we don't have that perception and we don't have that self-awareness, we think if we admit to something, then we're going to be doomed forever, as opposed to just admitting it and owning it to be able to build a solid foundation and be able to do better, commit to doing better, and be able to move on.
So you've got the benefit of hindsight now in looking at the situation, and I've obviously asked you this question before, but if you had it to do over again, looking back on those 10 months, would you have done anything differently? Would you have done it at all? Would you have jumped into that situation?
Yes. So taking the role of founders was a challenge. There were very tumultuous. There was a lot of tumultuous times during almost my entire duration there. It was a blissful 2 weeks, and then things changed. However, I took the position because of my commitment and my passion to diversity and inclusion and the opportunity for equity in the beer industry. I took the position for founders to do better, not just for founders themselves, but to be able to set an example for other breweries across the country.
There's a lot of opportunity there.
Yes, immense opportunity. And I also left the position for the same reason. I left the position because of my passion for diversity and inclusion and my integrity and ethics. So my reason for coming to Founders and my reason for leaving Founders essentially were the same. So if I had to do it all over again, I would still do it all over again, exactly the same way.
Yeah. And there's a lot of parallels between your previous work in tech, which isn't very diverse either, and craft brewing. So how do you sort of view that?
Yeah, so that's what also intrigued me about going into the craft industry was I was very well familiar with technology, where I first started, my way into diversity and inclusion was through sales. And so I was thinking, okay, in order to increase sales, we need to expand our market base and we need to expand who we're targeting. And so similar to technology, it was becoming saturated where the mainstream, we were targeting white middle-aged males over and over and over again without building strategies for other qualified people who have great experience who maybe weren't getting that attention in the technology scene. So I ended up doing very well in sales by utilizing and implementing diversity and inclusion strategies. So the same is seen here in the beer industry, where we can only target white middle-aged men for so long, as we all know. And we want to continue to grow our companies and we want to grow our business. We need to increase sales. The reason and the way we're going to increase sales is by diversifying our market force and diversifying our consumer base.
Mm-hmm. Just a reminder, feel free to send questions. I know some of you already are. One of those questions that came in, what's your opinion on how we change the conversation from a singular breweries problem that allows us in this room to distance ourselves from the responsibility and talk openly about the clear systemic problems across the craft brewery industry?
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's really easy, especially for those of us who haven't worked at Founders or haven't interacted with Founders. It's really easy for us to say, "Oh, well, that's not us, and we haven't had a lawsuit, so we're okay." Just because you haven't had a lawsuit doesn't mean you're okay. What's really important is to understand that you are being intentional and you're being strategic by having a diverse workforce, by implementing inclusion strategies, by ensuring that in order to have an inclusive environment, that responsibility is everyone's responsibility. That isn't just a leader's responsibility. That isn't just the CEO or the co-owner or the owner or the president of the company. That's everyone. So just because you didn't have a lawsuit or you didn't have a discrimination suit that had come to your attention doesn't mean you're free of this and don't have to think of this, because we're all human, and humans interact with each other in ways that sometimes clash with one another. So it's really important to have that self-awareness to realize, hey, it's everyone's responsibility to be inclusive. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure that we're in a safe and open environment. So diversity is everything that encompasses us. Diversity is our diversity of background. It's our diversity of thought, diversity of experience. And diversity is everything that we have that we bring to the table. And inclusion is ensuring that we have a seat at the table and a voice at the table. And all of our responsibilities here in the industry is to ensure that everyone that we work with has a seat at the table and has a voice at the table, and that we're being open to all experiences and all aspects and perspectives of life, because when we're open to that and when we build our business practices on that, that's how we have a higher performing company. That's how we have better sales. That's how we have increased rates of retention.
There's a lot of will to do that in the room. I mean, that we saw the show of hands. The hands all went up. What are some actionable things hiring managers at craft breweries can do to diversify their talent pools?
Yeah, so some actionable things, I would say, let's say if your brewery or your organization is a very homogenous organization, which is very typical of what we're seeing in the industry right now. So if it's homogenous, then be strategic and intentional to lean on other partners. So if you are coming out with new beers and if you want to have new flavorings that will attract different audiences, then learn those audiences. Utilize our resources. We have Google, where we can connect with, with Google and social media. It's easy for us in this industry to connect with pretty much anyone else in the industry, or anyone else who are consumers, who are interested, who care, who would bring in additional perspectives. So connect with other people. Also, if you are trying to be more diverse from an underrepresented group or a marginalized group perspective, then network with those groups. Breweries have started with, hey, I'm starting this brewery with my friend named John, and now we're growing. We're going so quickly, we need to hire new people. John, who do you know? Do you have friends who are available? Yeah. And that's how they grew, is because we kept hiring based on people who we knew, and those people that we knew are more than likely people that were just like us. So what about if we make those people who are just like us build those relationships from other groups? Let's connect with our local chambers. Let's connect with our Black craft brew groups. Let's connect with these other groups that are we already know that they're passionate about the industry, but let's start building relationships with them, because then that can be a funnel for hiring, that can be a funnel for events, that can be a funnel for sponsorships, that can be an avenue also for volunteer opportunities with your staff, where then you've just expanded your network. So now when you're thinking of a position, you're not just thinking of John and John's friend, you're thinking of this other group and that connection, because now you've had this organic relationship with them.
Yeah, and that sort of builds off this next question that we got in, is you're building off you're looking for diverse talent pools. Craft breweries have strong local ties in their communities. So what advice would you give brewers on how they can go beyond employing a diverse workforce, and also support diverse groups in their communities?
They go hand in hand. Typically, breweries are not reflective of the communities that they're in. Typically, the communities are more diverse than the brewery. So if you're well ingrained in the community, that provides additional opportunities for your brewery to be more diverse, to be more well-rounded, to bring in other voices, other perspectives to build your team.
One thing I'm curious about is how a small business, I mean, look, there are like nearly 8,000 craft breweries out there, and a lot of them are very small, and they're not, you know, they're not flush with cash, you know. They're trying to push forward, and they can probably barely afford, you know, a bartender, let alone, you know, a diversity and inclusion director. So for those companies in sort of like the startup or the entrepreneurial phase who can't make that hire, how can those companies build a meaningful diversity and inclusion and equity program?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to tell you, you don't have to have a me on your leadership team to be a diverse employer. You don't have to have a diversity and inclusion director in order to be equitable, because it's all of our responsibilities. It kind of circles back to one of the questions earlier. We understand that not everyone is going to be able to have the resources to be able to bring on that type of a resource. However, we're also connected to one another. So it's not just the leader's responsibility. It's not just the CEO, it's not the president, it's all of us. And so when we're thinking, hey, how can we be more equitable? Lean on your partners, utilize your resources, lean on those who have different experience than you do. You know, so much of breweries and recipes is just idea sharing. It's the same exact concept.
In the 10 months that you've been working in the industry, were there anything on the diversity, inclusion, equity line that surprised you? As far as how far the industry is or is behind?
Not necessarily. I had an understanding. I think in my head, I thought it'd be very similar to technology. I understand that we have a long way to go, but it's important that we have forums like this where I think we're now in the age of talking about the issues here. So I think, you know, as awful as the founders' experience was for a lot of people, the good that came out of that is that it offered an opportunity for us to be able to have dialogue. We're talking about things that before we kind of swept under the rug. We're being used to being more comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the only way that we're going to continue to grow, not just in our mindsets, but in our business as well. It doesn't help, clearly, to not talk about it. If we've learned anything from what we saw in the founders and the media story, by ignoring the issue, it only gets larger.
So your experience in founders has not chased you away from the industry, right?
I'm still in the industry.
So tell us a little bit about the consulting gig that you've got going on.
Yeah, so when I resigned from Founders, I resigned not having a job, which I would have thought I would never have done that, but because I had such strong convictions on standing my ground and having integrity and doing the right thing, that is why I resigned, and without having something else lined up. But within days of my resignation, several brewery owners and distillery owners and restaurant groups reached out to me and said, hey, I'm so glad that you did what you did. Your words made me realize that our business needs help, our brewery needs help, our restaurant needs help. And so then I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I help all of these groups but still find another job? And then I realized, hey, this is the career. This is the career path. And so I started my LLC because the industry needed it. And the industry told me we need this. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm doing this. And I'm appreciative that we now have an even greater platform to be able to more comfortably talk about, hey, what's happening in your bar? You know, how can we make this better? How can we rectify these situations? Because we're all human. Discriminatory actions, injustices, they're going to continue to happen because it's human nature. But the importance about that is being able to get ahead of it, address it when it happens, and have a structure and a plan on how to continue to improve your culture, but also ensure that those practices are not tolerated.
In one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that you've sort of changed your own mindset around things and sort of come to sort of an acceptance of there are going to be companies or people who just are not going to be looking to do diversity, inclusion, or equality. How did you come to that? Like, how do you view that now?
So I used to think everyone wants this. This is great. Why wouldn't you want to make your company better? Why wouldn't you want to protect yourselves? I realized and experienced firsthand that there are individuals that will not care, that will think this has nothing to do with them. And there may be people that are in this room that are thinking, oh, why am I here? But I realize I can't change the entire industry. I can't change the world. Like I once thought I had the ability to do, hypothetically speaking. But for those who want it, great, let's do it. But there are going to be those who are not ready or may not be, and that's on them. If that's the path that they choose, then that's on them.
How do you reflect on the way that you resigned from Founders? Would you do that the same way?
I would. I wish that I was able to have more narrative on why I did it that way, but also it was a bit tricky of a situation. So to share with you all, I've had a lot of questions, and there have been some media articles that said I resigned on social media. I did not resign on social media. I resigned directly with the leadership team, then posted my resignation on social media. The reason of why I did that, I had a civil rights attorney reach out to me the day that I resigned, before I had told anyone I was resigning, and she gave me the advice, if you're going to resign, you need to do it publicly, because Founders was already so much in the news across the entire country at that point. Me resigning without the public knowing of why created the opportunity for others to create the narrative for me, or to discredit me, or to say that I resigned for other reasons that weren't true. So I'm sure, and I know that it was a shock to so many people to be able to see that, especially on social media. But I wish that I was able to communicate the reason of why. In follow-up media articles, I do talk about that. But if I'm still glad that I did it the way that I did, in order to keep my own narrative, in order to be able to have the opportunity to continue in this work, as opposed to other entities saying other things or discrediting me, which could have potentially blacklisted me in my career.
One more question on Founders, I guess. In the time that you were there, how did you see how did the employee dynamics change? Did a more diverse talent pool come in?
Great question. So we focused heavily on that. I worked with the HR department on that. But as time went on, and as there were more, so we would hire more people of color, but then as more news articles came out about the lawsuit, then we would lose more people of color. So I think in the LGBTQ perspective, I believe we did have an increase of LGBTQ employees, or either more of an increase of those who were more comfortable being out. I also identify in that community, and I'm very out and very open about my identity. And I think the staff knowing, hey, there's somebody else in leadership who's open too, I think that helped them feel more comfortable. But as far as the dynamics of the employees, what that will be after here, I don't know.
Is Graci LLC taking clients?
Yes, I am available, and I will travel.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Give it up for Graci.